welcome everybody to this retreat seminar on Vijñāna Bhairava. Now, I am very much privileged, and it's a great joy to be here in this place and to be invited by Swami Bharati personally to teach such an extraordinary text to a group of already enlightened yogis who will be even more enlightened by the study and meditation of this text. And we are following the tradition by starting with what is called in Sanskrit the Mangala Shloka, or Mangala verse. It means a benedictory, an invocation, which every religious text in Sanskrit starts with a Mangala. That means it invokes the blessings of the deity and prays for removal of hindrances which may come in the way of this teaching and this practice. And it also gives an indication of the meaning of the text which is going to follow. Now, I hope you have all got a file, or not yet? Not yet? The files to be distributed, because in the file you have the Mangala, text of the Mangala. Vijñāna Bhairava Bhavapaya Kantasya hetu statu Ritani pratitascha piravarucham Ishu takasyantaka Pirambayativa svayogini sahas Tasya prabhupayiravu Vishvasmin paranadikrit vijayate Vijnana rupa para. Maybe we do it once again. Eventually you will learn it. If you do it every day, you will learn. Vijñāna Bhairava Bhavapaya Kantasya hetu statu Ritani pratitascha piravarucham Isho takasyantaka Pirambayatiya svayogini sahas Tasya prabhu bhairavu Vishvasmin paranadikrit vijayate Vijnana rupa para. This is the first benedictory verse by Kshemaraja, who is the commentator of the first part of our Tantra, Vijñāna Bhairava. And in this verse, he explains the title of the text and the meaning of the name Bhairava. And as it is usual in Sanskrit, the meaning of a name is derived from its etymology or from its analysis. And the name Bhairava is connected with several words connected with Bhi, Bhaya, Bharana, etc. So Bhaya actually means fear. And Bhairava is the one who removes fear. The Spirunam Abhaya Pradu, he bestows fearlessness to those who are fearful. And the other connection with his name is Parana, fullness. He fulfills everything. He fills the whole universe with his presence. So that's why this is a provisional translation. Glorious is the Supreme, whose nature is consciousness. Vijnāna Rupa Para. Who is this Bhairava? Who is this divine? He is of the nature of consciousness. And that we come to the name, Vijñāna Bhairava. And hence he is the cause of overcoming the fear of those afflicted by worldly existence. Who is revealed in the innermost abode of the heart, Retamni. The Lord of the fearful, the ender of death. And this is a play with the words. Death is the one who puts an end to everything, Antaka. But he is the one who ends the Antaka, Antakasya Antaka. He is the one who overcomes death. Again, who removes fear along with his own energy. And here the word is very beautiful, Svayogini. His energy is, of course, Shakti, and she is Bhairavi, and she has so many other names. But she is Yogini. And that calling the Shakti Yogini is already an indication that it is a matter of getting into that energy, which is the energy of yoga. She is his own Yogini. This Lord Bhairava, who fills the whole universe, Vishwasmin Paranadi Krit Vijayate. So he is not only defined by the meaning of his name, but he is the essence of the nature of consciousness, Vijnana. So here we immediately have the title of our text. Vijñāna Bhairava means that divine whose name is Bhairava, whose essence is consciousness. So it's not some god, somewhere up in Kailash or something. It is your own consciousness. And so the entire content of the text is already contained in this meaning of the title. Now, it is wonderful that you have come here to study and practice with this extraordinary text. Vijñāna Bhairava is an extraordinary text in the whole of yoga and Tantra literature. I would say not only of what we call Kashmir Śaivism, but of Indian spirituality as a whole. And why it has been discovered so late? Because these Kashmiri texts, they were hidden in manuscripts, and they were, for centuries, they were passed down only orally from one Pandit to another Pandit and so on. So it's only 100 years ago that this text has been published in Sanskrit. And then there was a whole wave of discovery that this is an extraordinary text for the path to divinization. It is a way to realize the divine and to be divinized, to be deified. Now, this text has become famous for the right and for the wrong reasons. For the right reasons, we will of course discover during this week that we have the chance to go really deep into every verse of the text and to put it into our practice, bring it into our meditation. So the right reasons are very clear. It is so extraordinary in the whole tantric and yoga literature. And Abhinavagupta, the great master in the 10th, 11th century of Kashmir, He calls it Shiva Vijñāna Upanishad. The Upanishad means the secret teaching of the knowledge of Shiva. So a knowledge means just not knowledge. It means mystical knowledge. Vijnana I have translated often as mystical knowledge. That consciousness, it's mystical consciousness, etc. So Shiva Vijñāna Upanishad is a very high title which Abhinavagupta has given to this text. Now, definitely, we are justified to call it an outstanding, extraordinary text, but why this text has become known also for the wrong reasons. Because, and here I come to my tradition, which is Kashmir Śaivism. It has also fallen into the hands of teachers who have not received it from the tradition and who have applied some fanciful interpretations. And so that is why we are coming to the selection of the texts and translations which we are considering here as authoritative. There are lots of translations and commentaries by different teachers and who are sometimes very far from the original meaning. Now the text is so brief that unless you receive it from an oral teaching in the tradition, you can be easily misinterpreting it. And when things are taken out of their context, and they can be also ridiculed, as it happens, for example, we say, oh yes, Vijñāna Bhairava, you can get enlightenment by sneezing also. So it's very easy, but it's total misunderstanding if you don't know the whole philosophical, spiritual background of that tradition in which it has been revealed, and what we call, right or wrong, Kashmir Śaivism. So that is why we are very cautious in which, and very selective, that's why we are here to study it so thoroughly, very selective which text editions, which translations, which commentaries are authoritative and are authentic. And we will come to the whole question of who has which text, etc. I'm just quoting my master, Swami Lakshman, who was the last master of Kashmir Śaivism and who attained Samadhi in 1991. He was definitely the last who could give an authoritative interpretation to this text. And that is why his disciples who have edited and translated it into different languages, they have followed the tradition and they have given an authentic interpretation. I'm just quoting the French scholar Liliane Silber. According to me and others also, French translation, and unfortunately French for many of you, and her commentary on the Vijñāna Bhairava is the best modern commentary that we have. And she was already a great scholar of Sanskrit and of Buddhism and of Veda and other schools of Indian thought when she came to Kashmir to study Kashmir Śaivism. And in spite of her great knowledge of Sanskrit and so on, she said it was impossible to understand this text. And then she met Swami Lakshman, and then she writes in her preface, "It is an inestimable chance that was given to me to dive in the knowledge of this great master, the last who possesses the key of such a deep and mysterious doctrine among all, who has permitted me to comment on this difficult Vijñāna Bhairava." So it is therefore with a great sense of respect that we have received this tradition from Swami Lakshman and his disciples, and his other disciples who have translated it in English is Jaideva Singh of Varanasi, and both he and Lilian Silban were great spiritual friends of mine also. And Jaideva Singh, he sat at the feet of Swamiji in Kashmir for many years to study all those texts. And he is not sufficiently acknowledged as really the pioneer who has made this tradition known, because people who are not Sanskrit scholars, and he has translated and commented in English most of these texts. So we are very lucky to have his translations. And I will come to the details, what is the strength and the weakness of each one. But he has a great merit. And Lilian Silban and Jaideva Singh in the tradition. And then there was a great Pandit in Varanasi, Vrajvalabh Trivedi, who was a disciple, and I don't know who of you know the name of Pandit Gopinath Kaviraj. He was a very great scholar of Tantra in Varanasi, and he had also a number of disciples. So Vrajvalabh Trivedi was a great scholar of Tantra, and this is with the Hindi. For the Hindi speaking among you, it's a Hindi translation and detailed commentary. So for the Hindi people, it is extremely useful. Then for the few French, I don't know if there's any French speaking here, but then Lilian Silbans, and otherwise Jayadev Singh's. And, well, before that, I have to say the original edition by the Kashmir series of texts and studies contains also the commentaries. The first part of the text has been the commentary by Kshemaraja, who was a disciple of Abhinavagupta. And unfortunately, only the part up to verse 23 has been preserved, and the rest has been lost. Mostly people assume that he didn't complete his commentary, but it's not true, because I have found some fragments where he quoted his own commentary. So it means it was complete, but it must have got lost at some point. So there are two other Kashmiri commentators in the 17th and 18th century. Kshemaraja was in the 11th century. They also felt the need to write the Sanskrit commentary, but they are not always up to the mark. One can see that the tradition has already been somehow lost, or partly not understood, or been under the influence of other schools like Vedanta, etc. One is by Śiva, and occasionally we will refer to him. He has sometimes very useful insights. And sorry. Then there was a commentator, Vamana, in the 9th century, and then Patta Ananda was another commentator in the 17th century. So we are just occasionally referring to the commentaries, definitely by Kshemaraja, but also by Śivopathyaya. Now, what is the importance of the Vijñāna Bhairava can be seen from the fact that all these great Kashmiri masters, they quote whenever it comes to the question of spiritual experience or mystical experience or practice, they quote the Vijñāna Bhairava with great sense of respect, always with the epithet Vijñāna Bhairava Pattaraka. Pattaraka is a title you give to the Lord himself. So the great venerable Vijñāna Bhairava says this, and then this is the authority on that particular experience or practice. So all these great masters like Abhinavagupta and Kshemaraja and Jayarata and so on, they have all quoted verses from the Vijñāna Bhairava, and along with the quotation, they also give a kind of commentary. So these commentaries are extremely useful for understanding the original meaning. Now, I have been asked some years ago, well, I have not mentioned 2 or 3 more translations of the Vijñāna Bhairava. Swami Lakshman has been teaching this text many, many times, and to many disciples or devotees in different languages, also in Hindi, Kashmiri, in English, of course French he didn't know, but that was Lilian Silban who translated it. So at least in these 3 languages. And so some of his teachings have been recorded, and then from the recording they have been copied and they have been edited. Now these are 2 versions of his oral teaching, which there was a little confusion maybe on the website that there are 2 versions which have been edited in a different way. This I have been involved by writing introduction and translating the verses, literal translation, before it comes to his interpretation. And another edition is this one. And here the weakness is there is no translation of the verses, and so all this, discussions with the disciples, which have absolutely no relevance, they are all just literally printed. It doesn't make much sense. The editing and oral teaching, anybody of you who knows, who is involved with editing of Swami Veda's teaching knows, you have to remove certain things which are repetitions or which are unnecessary questions and so on. So these are the 2 versions which have come out of the same teaching, and we will try to complement whatever we need. And now the advantage of this, I'm sorry to say, because it's my own translation, and I like to teach texts which I have translated myself. So I stand behind it. And then you can always compare or improve it, etc. But at least you have. That's why I recommend those who don't have this book. There are still some books available which can be purchased, pre-ordered. And so by the end of this introduction, you please try to collect your books, material, and those who don't have any text, the only solution is to make photocopies, because there's no time now to get more copies. So at least you must have a text in hand when we are discussing the verses. Yeah. So at the end of this introduction, you please see which copies are available, and those who don't have any text, you please tell me or tell the organizers, and we can make photocopies of the text. Yeah, this is very important to have your material in hand. Now, of course, I don't need to say there are some of you German speaking. I have done it in a German translation with my own commentary and the introduction. So, nice little book, you can put in your pocket. But I have to add, with all these translations, commentary, etc., this is a text which is very important to get an oral teaching. because there are so many, it is so complex, and it is so brief. So even if you read one commentary, it is not exhaustive. Even Swamiji, what he said in this teaching, he said something else at another time. I know it for myself. I have been teaching this text, but every time some new insight comes, and so it is very necessary to have it in an oral teaching. And of course, at the end of each session, you can also ask questions in a little limited way because we are so many, but questions related to the text. So, and not only the oral teaching, but also combining it with the practice. And then I'm coming to that. Now, I have been asked by one of the great scholars of India, maybe the Indians may be knowing him, Professor G.C. Pandey. He said, Bettina, you should write a book on the yoga of Kashmir Śaivism. I said, Babre, see, what does it mean, yoga of Kashmir Śaivism? Now, talking only at the level of the Tantras. I think everybody knows that the Tantras or Agamas are the original revelation, and then come the commentaries and the later texts and so on and so on. And so on. But only at the level of the Tantras. I just want to tell you what is the richness of this tradition. There is one Tantra which is called Malini Vijayuttara Tantra. And very meritoriously, one scholar, Somadeva Vasudeva, he has written a voluminous work, The Yoga of the Malini Vijayuttara Tantra, which is out of print and which at some point of time it was available in the internet for €1,000, I have heard, because people know its importance. Malini Vijayuttara Tantra is one of the basic tantras on which Abhinavagupta in the 10th century wrote his voluminous Tantra Loka, Light on the Tantras. Then another Tantra which, of course, Vijñāna Bhairava and Malini Vijayuttara, they are among the most ancient Kashmiri Tantras. Then there are two Tantras. I am speaking of the yoga chapters because every Tantra contains chapters on ritual, on all kinds of things, but the chapters purely on yoga. Netra Tantra, I have been teaching it now a few times, and I have translated the chapters. There is no translation of Netra Tantra except in Hindi, and I have translated the yoga chapters, which will be published by next year, I promise. It's fantastic text, fantastic. And luckily also not so long. Now, along with the Netra Tantra, this is the same tradition, is the Swachanda Tantra. I'm not writing down these names, most of you know it already. Swachanda Tantra is a much more voluminous, 5 volumes in Sanskrit, and it is very extensive as far as the yoga is concerned. But nobody has done this work to translate the yoga chapters. Sorry. Swachanda Tantra goes into great detail. So anybody who wants to know the details of the practice and the theory also, Swachanda Tantra is an extraordinary text. And it complements the Netra Tantra. Netra means the third eye. So it's part of the only Tantra in the whole tradition speaking of the third eye. So we are all speaking of the third eye, whether Buddhists or Hindus, and opening of the third eye. But this is the only Tantra which explicitly speaks about the third eye of Shiva, but then ours. own. So Netra Tantra and Svachanda Tantra, they are complementary. And then there is one brief Tantra which is called Paratrishika, which it is, the more brief a Tantra is, the more difficult, because it's so compact and you need a commentary to understand what is actually meant, etc. Paratrishika Tantra has a fantastic commentary by Abhinavagupta in the 10th century, Paratrishika Vivarana, which I have written a book on this, so it makes it a little more accessible. This is another basic Tantra of the yoga of the entire, what we call Kashmir Śaivism. Now, how these texts are interrelated, how they are complementary to each other, this is a whole scholarly work, like what the Somadeva Vasudeva has done, in a detailed way, how to go into these practices, how they are described in the different tantras, and they have influenced each other and so on. This is a very big task before scholars and, of course, practitioners. Now, you know very well, those who are practicing yoga and who are studying yoga, that unless you have some experience, you can't make sense of this, out of this text. So, experience and textual knowledge, they have to go together. And that is why a master like Swami Lakshman was so ideal, because he was a great scholar and a mystic and a Jivan Mukta. So it was in India in the past that the great scholars were also realized beings, realized yogis. But this is now going downhill, so it's very rare. The Pandits, they just have their own Shastra Gyan, and the yogis, they say, oh, it's enough, we are doing our practice, we don't need to go into all this. But to combine the knowledge with the practice, with the experience, and this is the richness of the Indian tradition. And I would say Kashmir Śaivism has a very extraordinary place here, because it combines so many things. It's a kind of synthesis of many aspects of Indian spirituality and yoga and philosophy. So this is just an idea of what still awaits us, and if any one of you is inspired to pursue this path, both studied, and there is a lot of material to be worked on and to be understood, to be practiced. Now, since I'm talking about the Tantras, there is one mysterious Rudra Yamala Tantra. Our Vijñāna Bhairava also says at the very beginning and at the end that this is the essence of Rudra Yamala. Now, Rudra Yamala is a group of tantras, and Yamala means a pair. Pair means Shiva and Shakti. So Rudra and Raudri, and so on. So the pair of Shiva and Shakti, but it's a group of tantras. And Rudra Yamala is supposed to be a very huge tantra, of which this Vijñāna Bhairava is the essence, Sara, and a part. And this Paratrishika is also claiming to be a part of Rudra Yamala Tantra. But actually, the scholars say that this Rudra Yamala does not exist. You know, every short tantra, this is the Indian tradition, wants to claim to be part of something much larger. You know, there are tantras which a friend of mine has published, one section of a tantra in 13 volumes. So they are huge texts. thousands of verses. We are very lucky, we have only 163 verses. So we can manage within a week to study this Tantra. So if the Tantra is short, it wants to claim that it is part of a much larger Tantra, and this much larger Tantra is called Rudrayamala. But both in the Vijñāna Bhairava and Bharatrishika, the text itself hints at the meaning that ultimately what is the result of this whole practice of these 112 dharanas. It is the union of Shiva and Shakti. But the union of Shiva Shakti, it's always there, but in the yogi, in us. So it leads to Rudrayamala. This starts from Rudrayamala and it ends in Rudrayamala, means the union of Shiva and Shakti, Bhairava and Bhairavi. Now, how do these tantras? See, what I'm telling you in this introduction, it should just remain in the background of this whole week, because then we are coming to the practices and to the text itself, and it will become much more practical. But I think it's very important to have that whole conception. What is a tantra? See, Vijñāna Bhairava is a revealed tantra. Now, we have different concepts of revelation in the Judeo-Christian tradition and so on and so on. It's different. But what means revelation here in the Shaiva context? How does it happen? And revelation can be explained in two ways. One is, it is a dialogue. And every tantra is a dialogue between Shiva and Shakti, between Bhairava and Bhairavi, or Devi, or whatever. And these dialogues are sometimes a little stereotype, Devi asks a question and the whole Tantra goes on with the answer. So there's not much of an interaction of Shiva and Devi. But in our Tantra, it is very lively. It's a very lively dialogue. And there is in the tradition, it is said that there are 5 types of relationship between guru and disciple. From the highest level, the divine, to the human level of guru and disciple. And it's very systematic, because it comes down at the highest level, parasambandha, or Mahan Sambandha. The highest relationship that exists is that between Shiva and Shakti. And because, although it is a non-dualist school, non-dualist philosophy, but it's a dynamic non-dualism. And this dynamic non-dualism is expressed in the fact that the absolute is not just a block, like we sometimes criticize Vedanta, say, oh, this Brahman is just like a brick. There is no dynamism, there is no relationship, there is nothing. But in Shaivism, you have that dynamic relationship of Shiva and Shakti. So at the highest level, there is the relationship between Shiva and Shakti. And then from there it comes down to the different levels of the emanations of the divine, down to the human guru and disciple. It's so beautiful because it's a continuity. See, what you experience with your guru, that is a relationship standing in that same tradition of that non-dual relationship of Shiva and Shakti, where Shakti assumes the role of disciple. And so there's a lot of speculation in the beginning of our text also, especially in the commentary, about a dialogue, a relationship within a non-dual philosophy. And there is a very famous was in the Swachanda Tantra. Guru Shishya Patistitva Swayam Deva Sadashiva Purutara Bhadaiva Kyair Tantram Sama Avataraya. The God Sadashiva himself, assuming the position of both teacher and disciple, revealed the Tantra by means of former and later sentences, that is, by means of question and answer. So it's the same divine who assumes both roles of guru and disciple. And we know, even in any other Advaitic tradition, that ultimately, if you arrive at the goal of your relationship with the guru, there is non-dualism, there is Advaita. So you come back to that non-dual relationship, which is that between Shiva and Shakti, as guru and disciple. So where Shakti assumes, when we start with the text, I will go more into this, the role of the Shakti as the questioner, as the disciple. And she does it, of course, out of compassion for humanity, because Shiva wouldn't get out of his silence if Shakti were not there to provoke him and to ask questions. So that dynamism is the part of that Tantra revelation, how it descends in that form of dialogue. And the other way of explaining revelation, and that is a little more philosophical, is that language, or the word, what we have in the text here are words. Language is not just at the level that I'm speaking and I'm writing and you're reading or something. This is the lowest level of language. But this language comes down from a higher level. And there are 4 stages how language descends from the absolute highest level, that is para. And it is Shakti again. It is a feminine. The word, the divine word Vaj, is a feminine power, is a Shakti. And this energy is at the absolute level, is para. It's beyond thought, beyond language, beyond imagination, beyond either oral, written, anything. It is at the absolute level, and then it descends one level down at the level what is called Pashyanti. Pashyanti literally means a seeing one, but seeing in the sense that intuition, intuitive insight. For example, a poet, if before he writes a poem, there has some flash of inspiration. And from where does it come? He can't say, but it comes. So this is Pashyanti. So the Pratibha means inspiration, insight, and it is still transmental. It doesn't have yet form of language, but it contains the seed of language. See that inspiration, which then it comes down to the level of thought. See, before you speak, before you write, you have it in your mind. So that is the mental level, is Madhyama, the intermediary state. And from afterthought comes Vaikari, that is the spoken or the written, the articulated language, which is what we are now speaking, and anything manifested in the body. Actually, Vaikari is related to the body, because in the Indian tradition, the written word comes much later in importance than the oral. Oral is first, and we'll come to that when we start with the text, because it starts with the very word Shrutam Maya Deva. So these 4 stages of descent of the divine word, of the absolute, to the level of language, these are stages of revelation. So where a tantra or a revealed text, it is derived from this highest level of the word and comes down to, first to the oral, because for centuries these tantras have been revealed orally, have been passed on from guru to disciple, and have not been written down. When somebody asks, but how old is the Vijñāna Bhairava? Well, it's very difficult to say because we only know the written version of it. Cannot be older than, say, the 5th century. But that also we are not sure. But the written version comes so much later. There is so much of oral tradition which precedes. And oral tradition means the whole experience and practice which gets condensed into the Tantra. It is all an oral transmission. And then it gets into a text, and then the text is written on a birch bark manuscript. In Kashmir they were written on birch bark, so you can imagine they are not very durable. So we have a lot of birch bark manuscripts in libraries, but they are just falling apart. So that was the paper. And then in 1918, finally, this text was brought out in book form. So this is the whole descent from this highest level, and that is why what we have to do is not to remain on the level of Vaikari, but this Vaikari, this written oral word, has to lead us back to the source. So to ascend to the level of thought is not difficult because we are anyhow thinking too much. But from the level of thought to the level of the origin of thought, which means an intuitive insight, suddenly you get a flash of understanding what is, and you can't explain it rationally why you got this flash. And that brings you to the level of Pashanti. So what we do in meditation is to get back to that level of the origin of thought, origin of that insight, and then, if we are very fortunate, to the highest level of Para, the Supreme, the Absolute, and where it all has to lead back. So it is in the whole tradition of Kashmir Śaivism, you always have these 2 movements. There is a movement of descending, the divine descending, and then the human ascending. So these 2 movements are complementary, and there's no descent without ascent. So that is why we shouldn't be stuck with the words. We have to move from the words to the source of the language, from where it comes. So this is, and even the Tantras are very conscious about the way they are transmitted. Because obviously it's not Shiva who came down to write these texts. No, he needs an instrument. And that instrument is called Tantra Avataraka. You know, Avatara means the one who brings down the Tantra to the level of language. In the modern scholarly terms, they call it a redactor. It's a redactor who edits a text. What we are doing, we are editing a text and so on. But the Tantra Avataraka, he receives that oral teaching and then he puts it into a proper language and so on. And in between he adds something of his own, and the text even says, no, this is the Tantra Avatar. It's not Shiva who speaks. It's not Shakti who speaks. It is the Tantra Avataraka who speaks. And we had heard this in the Netra Tantra very clearly. because the Tantra, after all, is the word of Shiva. So, but it is not always clearly what Shiva has revealed. So there are other things which are added by the Tantravatara, by the redactor, etc. Now, all this is actually only to give you the background of what a Tantra means and what this revelation means, and how with such great respect we have to approach such a text which comes down from the divine level to the level of human language. And of course, every translation is already a problem. Every translation, because you limit it to one meaning and then you exclude other meanings and so on. And that's why Sanskrit is so important, and we will try as much as possible to understand the Sanskrit words and this the text. I mean, I don't want to burden you with Sanskrit, but as much as you can enjoy and appreciate, not more than that. Now, this seems all a bit theoretical, maybe. First of all, we have to know that the Vijñāna Bhairava, that's why I said extraordinary text, it teaches us 112 ways of reaching the divine consciousness. It says explicitly 112. Why 112? I can't tell you, and the commentator also doesn't say. That's not so important. But what it means is that it is extremely rich as far as practice is concerned, and it becomes more and more subtle, more and more subtle, and more and more subtle. And the question will come also at the beginning of the commentary: who is qualified to receive this teaching? And Kshemaraja says in his introduction to his commentary, he says, only those who have been purified by a powerful descent of divine grace. Tivra Shaktipata Pavitrita. So it's not anybody who goes in the shop and buys a book, so, oh, this is quite nice, and so on. No, there must be something very powerful which motivates you, which attracts you, and which inspires you to understand and to go deeper into your own consciousness through these 112 ways or means. Now, see the word yoga? You would be a little disappointed. The word yoga does not occur in the entire text. But because it's a very ancient Tantra, and it is centuries earlier than the Hatha Yogic texts. Of course, Patanjali is ancient, there's no question about it. And Patanjali was known by everybody, the Tantras also. But the word yoga is not used. At the end, he uses the word yukti. Now, yukti is a kind of synonym of yoga. It means a method. It's a yogic method, a practical method. So yukti is used, and of course, from the very beginning, the word upaya. Upaya means, method. Because the Devi at the very beginning, she says, what are the means to reach that state? So upaya, but upaya is a very encompassing concept, it comprises all these 4 ways to the divine, etc., etc. So upaya is not applied to the individual practices which are contained in one verse, each in one verse of 2 lines only. But upaya is of course universally applicable for any practical way, practical method. Now what has become a habit in all those who write about Vijñāna Bhairava and who translate it is to use the word dharana. Yes. Now dharana, of course you know its definition in Patanjali. Now the Shaiva Yoga definitions are always different from Patanjali, although they are quite conscious of Patanjali, but they use the same word in a different meaning. Dharana means literally to hold something. You have some experience or some practice and not to let it go, not to, like the mind is just running away, just hold it. That's why Somadeva Vasudeva translates it as fixation. I don't like the word fixation. And also the word concentration also has been too much used and misused. But the interesting thing is that, again, the Tantra itself does not use the word dharana. So from where does it come? It has been introduced by one commentator, that is Bhatta Ananda, rather late, and who says dharana number 1, dharana number 2, dharana 112, and so on. So they are numbering the dharanas in all those editions. Now what means dharana here? Dharana just as a practice. In the Netra Tantra, there's a very high definition of dharana, where he says, that has been declared to be dharana by which the nature of the Supreme Self is always held firm in consciousness. Paramatma, Paramatmatvam. The nature of the Supreme Self, means of the Divine, is held firm in consciousness. That is called dharana. And how it is held firm? By absorption, samavesha, this holding firm. So it is the absorption or samadhi which is holding that divine reality, paramatmatvam, in consciousness, and that is dharana. It's very high level definition of dharana. Now, we are coming, of course, the whole week we will be busy with this 112 dharanas, so we are still using the same word, being conscious that it's not the Tantra itself which uses it. But the question of this multiplicity of so many practices, so many ways, so many experiences. And there Abhinavagupta has a very wonderful, to deal with such a multiplicity of so many means and ways. We will deal with this question of whether this morning or later in the afternoon, whenever. It doesn't hold. Abhinavagupta says in his Tantra Loka, for entering the supreme reality, whatever means is near to you, that should be accepted. Others should be discarded. There is no restriction regarding spiritual practice. According to the doctrine of Trika, and Trika is the triadic doctrine which means Kashmir Śaivism, there is equality in relation to all the gods, all the spiritual streams, mantras, sacred scriptures, agama, and paths, because everything is Shiva. So this is such a universal attitude, but in selecting your practice, you should select what is near to you. It's very, you can say psychological, or he's a spiritual master. Don't, people go do some far-fetched practices. Let's go to the shamans and something that is very far-fetched and so on. Must be something very exciting and so on. No, do something which is near to your mental, psychological, spiritual state, and which may change, of course, because you are not always in the same state. But what is near to you, that you should practice. And not jumping here and there, not now I'm trying this, now I'm trying that, and something else. But stay with that which is near. But nothing is excluded. No practice is excluded. And that is why the richness of Vijñāna Bhairava dharanas is that you can find things from Buddhism, you can find things from Vedanta, you can find things from yoga, you can find things in the practices without being fixed in one way, one method, but you have to find that which corresponds to your nature, which corresponds to your spiritual state, and then go along with this. Don't jump somewhere else. You practice that. But we will, of course, this will occupy us much more than in this introduction. And I have already told you, now Abhinavagupta himself says, well, when there's so many ways and means to reach that ultimate reality, and then who is qualified to practice? And this is from the Tantra Loka. Not everybody is worthy or capable, and the word is patra. Not everybody is a patra, is a worthy recipient of that practice or of the teaching, of that experience. But for some who have been purified by a powerful descent of grace, tīvra shaktipata pavitrita. So there must be something which inspires you, which has brought you here from all the corners, and in that search, and that is the tīvra shaktipata. And then at the end of this chapter, which is he says, he has a very nice simile. He says, the ketaki flower, it's a very fragrant flower, can be enjoyed only by the bee, but not by the fly. So that is, your qualification means you must have a sense for that. See, fly will not go, it will go to the dirt. But the bee will automatically go to this fragrant flower. So ketaki kusuma, it's such a beautiful verse. And that is why, in order to worship or practice or experience the supreme non-duality of Bhairava, only those are fitting who have been inspired by the great Lord, Mahesha Chodita. So this to be a bee and not a fly. Yes. So the question of how to relate this text to our practice, and that brings us also a little bit to see about our daily program, which may be a little different from the normal ashram timetable. What is required for practicing this text is very subtle state of awareness. Because it is so subtle, sometimes even the difference from one dharana to the next, if you don't have some experience, you'll say it's the same. It's not the same. But a subtle state of awareness. And that has to be cultivated And that is why silence is so important. And silence not as something imposed as a discipline on you, but something which you feel the need for, so that you are not taken out of that, out of that atmosphere of concentrated awareness, where you have to live with the text. For 1 week, we live with the text. And that means not jumping here and there with our talking, but we try to keep that state of awareness and silence, not for 24 hours, because in the afternoon there will be a gap where we can have some exchange. You have got the timetable in your file, I suppose. So only 2 things which I want to clarify. One is about this morning session, because it's the ashram routine to have this hatha yoga, this joints and clans practices in the morning, so that according to the ashram routine and Swamiji's wish, that continues. But then there will be a little gap of 15 minutes, those who are doing those practices, and then we will have meditation from 6:30 to 8. Meditation means silence, no explanation, no interference, nothing. But for those whom 1.5 hours is too long, you can also, if you sit a little in the back, you can get up after 1 hour, if it is too much for you. Otherwise, for me, 1.5 hours is ideal, but don't feel obliged. You can, maybe if you sit in the back and you're not disturbing the others, you can get up after 1 hour and live quietly. So this silent meditation will be 4 times a day, and only at noon time be complemented with some recitation, either our own recitation or some stotra, some hymns from the tradition which we will listen to. Today we will start, because it is all about Bhairava, and we will hear more about Bhairava in the text itself. We will start listening to a hymn by Abhinavagupta to Bhairava, Bhairava Stava. It is not very long, but to put us into that mood, and there is a translation. Unfortunately, I don't have it here. I have a German translation also, but it doesn't matter. Even if you just listen, it is a very powerful hymn. And again, like in our Mangala verse, Shiva or Bhairava is praised as the one who overcomes death, the one who ends death. And it's a very powerful hymn, which we use also when somebody is close to death. So we recite that. So that we will listen at 11 o'clock. And yes, afternoon is a little flexible time. So the only non-silent time is in the afternoon, when after the teaching, 4 o'clock. So between 4 and before Swami Veda Bharatis, all of course are participating. There is a time which is written little flexible, drinking tea doesn't take more than 5 minutes, but you can have a walk, you can form some groups and have some discussion about the text we have done, or spontaneous in the garden, and be outside, because otherwise we are always inside. Be outside in the garden, walk around, sit with some people who want to share something about the text or the experience, whatever. So let it be flexible. And slowly we will see how what form it takes. But there's no fix that we all have to walk together, or you can do it on your own. And or any personal talk. So if you have any personal talk or question, clarification, that is also the time. Otherwise, as I said, at the end of each session, when we are doing a text, there will be some time, short time, for asking questions related to the text. Because we cannot go too much outside, we have to concentrate fully on the text. And so that will be at the end of each text session. And other questions eventually can be discussed in the afternoon when we are after 4 o'clock. Is there any other question regarding the daily program? Then it is also a part of my tradition. It's not only my tradition, it's this tradition, that we recite these Mangala shlokas, not only the one which we did now, but you have a whole list in your file, which are introductory verses to many of the major works of Kashmir Śaivism, and which really contain a lot of the essence of the spirituality in one verse. And so slowly we will learn them and we'll recite them together, and to make this, the texts come alive by reciting. And anybody who knows the tradition knows it's not something you read, but you recite it, you sing it. That's why we also, we are making an attempt to recite the verses of the Vijñāna Bhairava, as we have done the Netra Tantra, and I think it is a very good way to internalize the text, to feel the power of the text also. So that we'll try in the afternoon to get into that tune, so that the 163 verses, we have 8 days, so we will definitely complete the whole text and internalize it and try to experience that depth and that subtlety and the richness of this spiritual experience contained in the text. So these are all preliminaries, and now comes the question of the books. So first of all, who does not have a text? So I think that number, there are maybe 17 copies of this book are available. You have at the table there? So before going out, you please catch hold of a copy, and those who don't have, any text, you please tell one of the organizers, and we'll make photocopies, not the introduction and so on, but just only the text. Yeah, so that in the afternoon you have something in hand to. If those who want, for example, Hindi speaking, if they would like to borrow, because we have no time to go into the Hindi, so there are 2 Hindi translations. I can leave them here, but don't go far away when you always keep them back here. So should I leave them here? It may be helpful. And I especially recommend this Prajwala Trivedi. And the Sanskrit of course, that is only for. I think that is this much for the introduction, and then once you have your material, and then in the afternoon session we will start with the text.